Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending another At Home with Joseph webinar. Um, this is our last episode of 2020, which makes me a little sad. And I even got dressed up and sprayed cologne to make it all fancy and official. Next year, we're going to split things up and diversify At Home with Joseph by inviting guests from various walks of life. But for today, here's At Home with Joseph. Thank you so much for coming back, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Happy holidays.
Well, this is the last episode for the season of 2020, and before we see the year out, we want to spread a little bit of holiday joy to some of our neighbors here in our neighborhood. Every year, we usually host a holiday party with about 75 people at our home, and because we can't this year, we don't really want our neighbors to feel unforgotten or that we're not going to have our party. So we decided to print up some holiday cards, and I'm going to make some chocolate bark that I'm going to package up, and we're going to go around and hand deliver all of them to everybody's home and leave them on their doorsteps, just so that they know that we are still thinking of them and we still wish them a Merry Christmas, and to give them some good cheer before the new year rings in. So to get started, we need to start melting our chocolate. So the first thing we're going to do to make our bark is we need to measure out 3 pounds of chocolate. You want to use a really good quality chocolate, and I like to use a really dark chocolate, usually about 70%. I like to measure out the weight on a scale to make sure that it's precise. So put your bowl on your scale and tear it off, which means it will zero it out. And we can pour in and measure out 3 pounds of chocolate. Now I'm measuring this right into the bowl that I'm actually going to put on a bain-marie in order to melt the chocolate. And we're also going to weigh out our white chocolate. Again, set your bowl on your scale and tear it off so that it's down to 0. And we'll weigh out our white chocolate. And we've got 3 pounds of white chocolate. So we're going to set our chocolate chips, both white and dark chocolate, onto our burners on a double boiler. And we want to set the heat. I like to put the heat up to high just to get the hot water going. And then we're going to turn it down to a medium to a low heat. You want the chocolate to melt, but you do not want it to scorch, especially the white chocolate. If you heat it up too fast, you'll end up scorching the chocolate and it will just break apart into a million pieces and seize up. The dark chocolate is a little bit easier to handle when melting. This is a really easy recipe for making bark. It's not much more than 2 ingredients, which are your chocolate or white chocolate chips and a few tablespoons of butter. The important part to remember when making this is that you want to make sure that the chocolate is tempered. Otherwise, it's going to create that white film on it once it cools down and crisps up, which is sort of an oxidation. So you want to make sure that it's tempered properly. And so we very carefully melt it over a bain-marie. And then once it's done, we add some cold butter to it in order to melt it, but to cool the temperature down. The proper temperature for tempering chocolate is about 90 degrees for dark chocolate and about 84 degrees for white chocolate. So once this is melted, we're going to take it off of the heat and add the cold butter to it, which is going to help to cool down the chocolate before we spread it out into the pan. While the chocolate is melting, you don't want to work it too much at the beginning. I'm just testing to make sure that it is actually melting. We have turned our burners down to a medium heat, and you don't want to create a lot of steam around the bowls. Any type of moisture or water will seize up the chocolate. So you want to keep your bowl, your spatula, and your surroundings as humid and as moisture-free as possible. So while our chocolate is melting, I just wanted to show you how we are prepared for when it's time to pour the chocolate into our pans. We've got 2 baking trays lined with parchment. There should not be any water or moisture on the parchment paper at all. Otherwise, it'll seize up the chocolate. And I just let it drape over because it's going to pour in. And these edges are actually going to help to lift this out once the chocolate has solidified in the pan. And for the white chocolate, we're going to do a white chocolate peppermint bark. So we've got 1 tablespoon of unsalted butter per pound of white chocolate. That's going to go in once it's fully melted to temper it and to cool it down a little bit. And then we're going to pour it into our pan, and we're going to top that with our peppermint stick. These are just candy canes that have been, I unwrapped, put them in a Ziploc bag, and just smashed them with a mallet. The other is going to be the dark chocolate bark, which again, we've got 3 tablespoons of butter for 3 pounds of dark chocolate. I've got toasted pecans, and I've got dried sour cherries. And those are going to get sprinkled onto the dark chocolate when the time comes. So when we deliver the bark to our neighbors, we're going to include a holiday card that we had made. We used an online resource for making this. You can use Minted or Zazzle or any of those online resources. But we really did take the time to have the envelopes lined with a beautiful silver. And this year, they were doing a metallic type of a card. So we had the card printed, which says, "Wishing you a happy holiday," sort of in the shape of a snow globe. And on the back, we had a personalized message, which says, "While we wish we could be opening our home for the holidays this year, in light of the pandemic, we will not be gathering. We do wish you a safe and healthy holiday and look forward to gathering in 2021. And so again, we're doing this because we normally invite people to our home for the holidays, and it just did not seem right to let the holidays go by and not spread some good cheer and wish our neighbors the best for this Christmas season. So our chocolate is near melted, and I pulled it off just slightly early. You can still see a few little lumps of chocolate in there, and I'm just going to let those melt on their own until it's nice and smooth. And then I'm going to add the 3 tablespoons of butter to this. And since I set this bowl on the parchment paper and there's water on it, I am going to change the parchment paper before I pour the chocolate into here. And you can already see that the chocolate is really starting to thicken up at this point. And we're just going to pour this into our pan. Make sure to scrape it all out. And we are just going to go ahead and smooth this out all over the tray with an offset spatula. If you want a thinner bark, you can get away with doing 2 pounds for a sheet pan. I like the thicker bark. I think it just makes a nice, it's a little bit more like a truffle for me. So I like biting into that big piece of chocolate, but that's just my personal preference. Gonna leave some ridges in there. And we're going to sprinkle on some of our toasted pecans. And our dark cherries. And the dark cherries can clump up, so as you're doing it, try to pull them apart so you don't have huge lumps of cherries in there. These will take a couple of hours to set up till they're nice and firm and they can be removed from the tray and we can cut them into pieces. I prefer to try to cut my bark rather than breaking it apart. I like nice uniform pieces, especially if I'm entertaining. I think it looks nicer when you can cut really nice squares or diamonds and stack them up on a tray. We're just going to give it a few bangs on the counter. And I'm going to finish the dark chocolate with a little bit of Maldon salt sprinkled on it. I think that's going to give it a nice salty flavor to balance out the chocolate and the sourness of the cherries. And we're going to set this aside to firm up, and then we'll come back and show you how we cut them and package them. We're going to go ahead and finish with our white chocolate. The white chocolate is always going to seem thicker than the dark chocolate. We're going to pour this out into our tray. And working quickly, we're going to spread this with an offset spatula. So it's nice and even. It's okay to see some swirls in the chocolate. I think that gives it a nice, interesting texture. And then we are just going to sprinkle our candy canes right on top of the white chocolate. And one of the ways to make sure that this just sets in is to give it a few bangs on your countertop, which will help to set the candy cane right into the chocolate. And we're going to put this aside and let this harden up. We have our beautifully finished bark here. We've got the white chocolate with peppermint sticks and the dark chocolate with sour cherries and toasted pecans. We're going to lift these out of the pan, and the parchment paper is going to help us, but we've got to just slightly loosen on the other two ends of the tray where the parchment paper does not exist. And that will just help it to pop out very easily and very cleanly. And we don't want to cut it until it's laying flat on the cutting board. You just want to gently pry it out of the pan and lift it so that it remains in one piece. Now, we did not put this in the refrigerator for this to stiffen up. I let it sit overnight and let it harden on its own. If you do put it in the refrigerator to stiffen up, you're going to cause the chocolate to oxidize. So I want to cut these. We need probably about 50 pieces to put in our bags. So the best way to cut this is you can do it very randomly, but I like to do it in a very clean manner is to mark the halfway point. So I need to get about 10 by 5 or 6. So if I mark it in half and mark each half in half and mark each of those halves in half, that's going to give me nice even cut lines. And this is going to crack as you're cutting it, so it's okay. You just want to try to get as clean of a cut as you can get, being very gentle, and you don't want to handle the chocolate with your fingers. That's only going to heat the chocolate up. Now we're going to cut our chocolate in the same way. I'm going to score some lines. And so our bark is going to get packaged one piece of each flavor of bark into a little cellophane bag. And then that will get tied and adhere to the envelopes so that we can deliver them to the neighbors. So the first thing we're going to do, because this can get messy handling all of the chocolate, we're going to bag all of the pieces of the dark chocolate first, and then we're going to bag all of the pieces of the white chocolate and kind of make it more of an assembly line style. So as we wrap up creating the rest of these, I just wanted to leave you all with a little bit of encouragement to spread some holiday cheer this year if you can. You never know what somebody's going through, be it a neighbor or a loved one. Either they're going to be home alone for the holidays, or maybe you have a loved one or you know somebody who's in the hospital with COVID. These are really difficult times. And so this year, if you can, either make something handmade or give a handwritten note or create something like this to leave at your neighbors, and just to wish them a happy holiday and to let them know that they're not alone at this time and that we're all in this together.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining again. I'm sitting here next to my fire because it's freezing here in Florida. But thanks for joining us and learning a little bit about chocolate and making chocolate bark. This is something that I make every year. And every year I try to make the toppings for it a little bit different. So just because we did a dark chocolate with sour cherries and the toasted pecans, sometimes I will do praline pecans. In fact, the recipe that you will be getting has the praline pecan recipe as part of it. But you know, you can do any type of a dried fruit, nuts. You can do other candy actually on top of the bark. So you can really be creative and put any type of an inclusion on top of the bark when you're making it. If you've got any questions, please go ahead and send them along. I'm going to start with a few that we've got, which have come in already. The first one is, what brand of chocolate do you use? I use Valrhona dark chocolate. Valrhona has a lot of different types of chocolate that have different percentages of cacao in them. I usually use a 70% or darker, but Valrhona is my choice of chocolate. It's a super high quality chocolate. When you're working with chocolate, you do, like bark or anything else really, you want to use a high quality chocolate. A lot of times the chocolate chips that you find in a grocery store are not the highest quality. And so when that's put into a bread or a cookie, doesn't make that much of a difference. But when you are using it to do something like a solid type of a chocolate, go a little bit more expensive and get a good quality chocolate. Sometimes my chocolate gets white spots on it. What is that? That's a great question. So the white spots is usually an oxidation called bloom on the chocolate, which usually happens with any type of a moisture that hits the chocolate, which usually relates to the sugar in it. So if you do see those white spots, it's not necessarily mold. It is not bad for you. You can still eat it. It will not affect the taste of it. But you can also reuse that chocolate, remelt it. It just means that it wasn't tempered properly for it to set. And so it just had a little bit of moisture and probably just the wrong temperature for when it solidified. Can you use the cherries in the jar that you use for other cookies or drinks? You cannot. So you want to use dried cherries, not wet ones. You don't want to add anything that has a liquid base to it, to the bark, because your chocolate will literally just seize up and crumble, and you don't want that. So any type of a dried inclusion that doesn't involve a liquid with it would be fine. Can I reuse chocolate that has seized? Oh, yes, you can. You can't reuse the chocolate that has seized for the purpose that you're using it for, but you can reuse it for other purposes, which would require you to add either extra fat like butter to it when you're melting it, or a liquid, say milk or heavy cream. You would have to put all of that in a bowl over a double boiler and liquefy it that way, and or melt it that way, and then reuse that chocolate, say in a frosting or in a whipped cream or even in a baked product. But you can't use it again for using for solid chocolate. Can you freeze the bark pieces? No, I mean, you can, but no, not really. That's going to create moisture in the chocolate, and it's only just, it's not going to look attractive. It's not going to ruin the chocolate, but it won't really look attractive. So if you do freeze it, you probably will need to remelt it and remake it again. Why do you use 70% cacao for the bark? I use 70% cacao or a higher percentage in almost everything that I do. I rarely use a milk chocolate. The higher percentage of the cacao is what's going to give you a more developed flavor in your chocolate. So if you ever eat a lesser quality chocolate chip, it mostly just tastes like sugar. When you start getting up into the higher percentages of cacao, you can start tasting the berry flavors, the cherry flavors, the smokiness, the coffee flavor in it. All of these flavors start coming out the higher up the percentage that you get. It also makes the chocolate more bitter because there's less sugar in it. But it gives you a much bigger flavor profile when you're making it. So when a lot of people say to me, oh, your bark is so good, I've never had bark that good, it's probably because mine's made with a higher percentage of cacao. So you're actually tasting the chocolate versus the sugar. How do you store the bark pieces? So I just leave them out on a tray, and I don't cover them in saran wrap because I don't want them to, again, get any humidity or moisture in them. So I'll just lay a piece of parchment paper over them, and they'll stay fine. It doesn't go bad. Usually they don't last that long to stay out for that long anyway. But yeah, they're very easy to keep. You can also keep them in a Tupperware thing. Just don't keep it fully sealed. You want to give it some air that allows it to breathe. And so I want to thank everybody for joining, especially if you're here throughout the season that we've been doing these. This is the last one for this year. We're going to start up again after Christmas, and we've got some great things that we're trying to develop for the new year and the spring season with having some guests and stuff on. So I'm going to be sending around an email to you guys asking you to respond to me with some home economics topics that you would like to learn about so that we can incorporate some of that stuff into it. So please feel free to respond. Let me know what it is you'd like to know about or learn or even have a conversation over. And you can always find the videos that we do on YouTube at Home with Joseph, and also on Aspire's website. And you can also find me on Instagram, again, at Home with Joseph. Feel free to message me with questions. If you're going to make the bark and you have a question, I'm happy to answer. But thank you for joining. I hope everybody has a great holiday season, and we will see you come the new year. Merry Christmas and happy holidays.